Good evening, patriots. The old man here. December 11th, 2024. Tonight, I'm going to cover what I've called my thesis on what has been going on with the fiat dollar and money since at least the let's say the mid-1860s. Prior to that, there was no federal central bank or no even talk of the federal central bank. And I believe that's where our problem started. Gold and silver is money. The dollar, the peso, the yen are all creation of man. They all have been and always will be corrupt. The world standard now is a fiat currency. No currency is backed by gold. Not in the extent, they may say it's backed by gold, but in reality, if you can't take your dollar, your peso, your yen, or whatever currency you got and exchange it for gold, of which there is none out there, then it's a fiat currency. I don't care what they claim it is, but it's a fiat currency. Backed by absolutely nothing, no matter what they claim. If it's not transferable or tradable to gold by the powers that be, then it's not a currency, or it is a currency. It's just a fiat dollar. It is not currency. Currency, or money, I should say, is gold and silver. That's it. God's money. So this is probably going to something, the thesis I've come up with, and basically giving you background on what I've seen, some of the things I've been thinking about, and it all starts with money. It's all about money. It always has been about money. Through my life, I've heard quite often it said that money is the root of all evil. In reality, in the Bible, it says the love of money is the root of all evil. And that is the central banks and governments. They love their money. They do not love anything but the money. And that is pure evil. It just keeps getting worse and worse. We've seen in the United States, across the world, I'm sure they've seen much worse. But in the United States, we've seen over the last 4 years just how corrupt this government is. And I'm referring to the Biden-Harris administration. But in reality, you can take this right back to, quite a few, but I can name them going backwards, the Kenyan, Bush Jr., Bush Sr., the Clintons, who's the damn peanut farmer? Jimmy Carter. I think he was just an idiot that was way above his head. But then again, he was a pawn. They could use him. And that's all he was really looking for. He's looking for power and notoriety. That's all he was looking for. And I think he spent the rest of his life trying to make up for it. I don't know if he's even still alive, but last I heard, he wasn't in good shape. He might be gone, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Prior to that, we had Johnson and blah, blah, blah. We can keep right on going backwards as far as evil politicians in our government. I'm sure I missed a few in there between, But at any rate, I want to start more or less from what I think is the beginning. Starting in 1865, 3 of our presidents from 1865 to 1901 were murdered. Three were murdered. One was wounded. The three being President Lincoln, President Garfield, and President McKinley were all murdered. They were all strong proponents of gold and silver and against any other currency. And that got all three of them killed. I don't care what they said about Lincoln. Most think it was the Civil Wars about slavery. They made it about slavery later in the war, but in reality, it was all about power. It was all about power. It was about gold and silver. It was about the central bank. And you can use the central bank as another term for the Bank of England. They've had that power for many decades, centuries actually, not decades, but centuries. And going right back to our Revolutionary War, you got to remember, and a lot of what you've been told of how great our heroes were, and they were great men, don't get me wrong, but the story is not told, I'm sure, as it really went. If you think about it, we had a bunch of untrained farmers, and only 3% of Americans at that time fought in the Revolutionary War. So you take a bunch of untrained farmers going up against the world's largest well-trained military, that being England. What do you think the odds of that are? Not very good. If you know anything about war, battles, strategies, whatever, if you know anything about that at all, just us winning that war, the whole story doesn't make sense. Make of it as what you will, but it doesn't make sense. In fact, the war was between the French and the English, trying to figure out who was going to take over the United States. Well, not the United States at that time, but you know what I mean. Who was going to take over the continental states. But anyways, getting back on track, in 1865, Lincoln was killed. In 1881, Garfield was killed. 1901, McKinley was killed. In 1905, Teddy Roosevelt was shot. That guy was so badass that he was shot during giving a speech, and he actually finished that speech. Badass. That's all you can say about that guy. Unbelievable. But what these four presidents have in common, besides the fact that they were murdered or attempted murder, was the fact that they were all Republicans. So in 1913, Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, with the help of others, on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, in the dead of night, Congress passed, with most of the people not being there, they were already home. Most of the congressmen were already home, just enough to get the job done, passed the National Reserve Act. Okay, and then Woodrow Wilson signed the bill into law. Some pretty corrupt crap there, but that was the beginning of what we know today as the dollar. And then right after that, that was in 1913, 1914, World War I started. Of course, we didn't get involved until 17 and 18, but at any rate, typical federal banks or the Bank of England will get you into wars when things start getting a little hairy and people are paying a little bit too much attention. They'll take you to war just to distract you from what they're doing and what they're taking from you. And then they can print more money to cover the wars, borrow more money, spend more money, and at the end of the day, leave the citizen of America or any other country, as far as that's concerned. They've done this time and time again all over the world. Leave the citizens in more debt. and basically turning them into slaves. And I'll talk more about that later. But after that was in 1914, the federal, we went into World War I, but in 1913, that was late 1913, so really didn't get going until 14. Not even 20 years later of printing money, we had the Great Depression. Markets, much like today, were blown out of proportion. The last 10 years, prior to Powell raising interest rates, the 10 years prior to that, we were effectively at zero interest rates. And why does that matter? You'd think, well, that's a good thing, people can borrow money cheaper. Well, the problem with that is, especially as a U.S. citizen, and I'll talk about the U.S. for now, U.S. citizen has no incentive to save. If you save in dollars, and let's say you put them underneath your mattress, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, them dollars have lost a lot of purchasing power. So what do you do? What do you do? If you can't save it, you might as well spend it. And then what we tend to do is overspend, borrow more money, get further in debt, and basically be a slave to the central bank. So at any rate, come back up a little bit. Like I said, after not even 2 decades of printing money, the central bank did, we come to the Great Depression. And after the Great Depression got a good start, I'll mention 9 million people lost their bank accounts. That money went to zero. 9 million people. Now you got to imagine, back in those days, there was a lot of people who didn't even have bank accounts. But 9 million people lost their bank accounts. After that, most people didn't trust the dollar any more than they trusted the banks. And so a lot of people went back to only trading in gold and silver. They wanted to be paid in gold and silver. They didn't trust the dollar. So at that point, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, took us off the gold standard, which means it was illegal for U.S. citizens to own gold. Okay, you were asked to turn in your gold and you'd be paid a fair price. Well, 2 months after that, when majority, I'm sure not all, but a majority of the gold was turned in, he raised the price of gold to $35, which is a 49% devaluation of the dollar. And the dollar at that point was your only choice. So not only did he force you into using the dollar, you could no longer use gold, he forced you into that and then turned around and devalued the dollar that you were forced into by 49%. How that president didn't get hung, I have no idea. I don't know what those people were going through. I really don't. I wish I could understand it. And but at any rate, he didn't. In fact, a lot of people liked the guy. That's why he wound up with so many terms. He spent 3 terms in office, died in office, and probably would have spent a 4th term. God only knows. But, oh my God, he got away with a lot of shit, and he really started this country on a downhill spiral. All right. And that brings me up to JFK. In 1964, JFK was assassinated, and what he was attempting to do is go back to the U.S. Treasury, remonetize it. In other words, go back to gold and silver. I mean, that's an oversimplified version, but that's where he was headed. That's what he was trying to do, and he was murdered for it. And then Bobby Kennedy was also an up-and-coming presidential candidate, felt the same way his brother did. He also got murdered for it. So, add 2 more to that list of presidents and potential presidents at any rate. They were not letting that go. After Kennedy, keep this in mind too, that silver back in 33 was also banned, 34 actually, silver was also banned. And when I say that, I mean silver bullion. In other words, 1 ounce bars, 10 ounce bars, 5 ounce bars, 100 ounce bars, civilians couldn't own. Now you could own or possess, let's say, silver coinage. That was still legal. But after JFK died, or was murdered, excuse me, they, and again, with what JFK was trying to do, they made sure to put an end to it entirely. And you notice that 64 was the last year that there was silver in our coinage. After that, it was a copper-clad coin. And much like exactly like the fiat dollar that's backed by nothing, the silver coin was also backed by nothing at that point. It was just a useless piece of crap that everybody decided they could still trade with. I don't know how people, in that change ever trusted the system. I really don't. But I guess here we are today, X amount of years later. What the hell is that? 60 years this year. 60 years ago this year, he was killed November 21st. 60 years, so almost 60 years. We're getting really close to 60 years ago that he was murdered. Then Johnson took over after JFK. Also remember that JFK was killed in Texas, and Johnson was a Texan. He was from Texas. They were rerouted at the last minute, and we all know how that worked out for JFK. So a little bit of sleight of hand, a little bit of bullshit going on there. And anybody that doesn't believe there was, well, I got news for you. You don't want to see the truth. The truth is right out there. All you got to do is look for it. And then Johnson, after becoming president, like I said, they made sure they took silver out of the coinage. And then Johnson, right immediately afterwards, and again, that's what the central bank does, is right after people start paying attention and they start getting backed into a corner, the central banks will bring you to war. Guaranteed, every goddamn time. Okay? There's just no doubt about it. That's the way it's going to go. They got to take the eye off the ball. If they're being watched and people are paying attention, they gotta distract you and point you in a different direction. And war, definitely, especially World War I, World War II, and even the Vietnam War, highly contested war, that took your eye off the ball. Everybody was talking every day. Everybody was talking about Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam. I remember when I was a kid, that's all everybody talked about every day. It seemed like, I don't know, maybe they weren't every day, but it seemed like it was every day when I was a kid. Talking about the Vietnam War. They weren't thinking about the silver in their coinage or nothing. They weren't thinking about that shit. They didn't think about how bad they were getting screwed with the dollar. But the system, or the trading system, was still on a gold system, just not the U.S. citizen. In other words, if there was a trading deficit between us and another country, we would pay them in dollars. Well, after Johnson got us into that war and the Federal Central Bank started printing money like it was going out of style, the other governments of the world could see the handwriting on the wall. The dollars they were getting paid in were more and more devalued every year. So they were taking payment for goods and services with a dollar that wasn't worth shit. The president of France was the first one to make the move, and he actually sent battleships over here to New York Harbor demanding gold instead of dollars. He didn't want dollars anymore. And that was in, don't quote me on the exact year, but I believe that was in 69, 70. And after a little bit, Germany got their money. They got their gold that they demanded. France got their gold, and a few other countries demanded their gold. They got it. They got stalled a little bit, but they got it. And after that, they decided, well, hell, we're going to have to put a stop to this, or all of our gold's going to be gone. Everything that we accumulated in World War I and World War II, of which we took for payment, from all these losing countries, Germany mostly being one of them, but also Japan, and all that, I believe anyways, all the looted gold from Germany that they looted from different countries that they invaded, I believe we wound up with that as well, buried in the vaults. And once you melt it down again, nobody knows what the hell, where it came from or anything else, so they could bury that. That's just another theory I got, but who knows? Hard to say what the truth is. Anyways, it's been so turned over. So anyways, in 71, Nixon was faced with, we got to do something about the disappearing gold out of Fort Knox, or we're going to be broke. And everything we gained over the years will be lost. So he took us off the gold standard, and countries could no longer be paid in gold. It was only dollars. Well, they didn't like that much. So we had some trading problems for a couple of years, and that's where things started getting shitty in the early 70s, where people didn't, countries of the world really didn't want to ship us anything. So supply chains broke down. Things got more expensive pretty rapidly, actually, because they just didn't want to ship. There's no sense in, shipping goods and services over here for a fiat dollar, that they knew was being inflated. By the day, the dollar was worth less and less, so they didn't want that anymore, and they couldn't get gold anymore. So what's the sense? It's just like, if a guy owes you X amount and he was paying you in dollars, and you realize the dollars weren't worth the shit, and you said, well, no, I don't want dollars, I want gold. I know gold's worth something, and it's pretty constant, so I want that gold. And he tells you, no, I ain't got any gold, or I ain't giving you any of my gold, but I'll give you dollars. You say, well, screw you. Then I'm no longer supplying you with product, whatever it was you were selling him at that agreed price. You just say, screw you. I ain't doing that anymore. Well, that's what the countries of the world were doing. And like I said, it broke down supply chains. And there was a lot of things we needed we couldn't get, so things got really expensive. You started seeing some pretty high inflation. Well, Kissinger come up with this great idea that what he would do is he made a deal with Saudi Arabia that all the oil, and they were the major oil producers of the world at that time, and still pretty much are. He made a deal with Kissinger, or Kissinger made a deal with him, that all the oil he sold from then on would be sold in dollars. So any country buying buying oil from Saudi Arabia would have to purchase dollars first. They couldn't pay in their local currency. They had to pay in the dollar. Well, what did that do? That strengthened the dollar. The dollar was widely needed, widely used at that point. And so we've been on the petro system since 73. Petrodollar system, they call it. So our dollar was backed by backed by the price of oil at that point. And then, we went through a lot of inflation, whatever else in the 70s, and price of gold got pretty high because shortly after he took us off the gold standard, it was then legal for U.S. citizens to own, possess whatever gold and silver again. And of course, we all know what happened in the 80s, early 80s, 80, 81. I don't remember exactly what year. I think it was 81 that, for the times, gold went to record highs, and silver, we all remember silver went to 50. And, they couldn't have that, and they had to push that down. There was a narrative of the Hunt brothers, blah, 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 bullshit. At the end of the day, they were losing control. They had to push it down. They squashed it because the rising price of gold and silver is a sign that your fiat currency is dying. and they come up with creative ways to push it down, bury it, cover it up, paper it over, whatever you want to call it. And they managed to suppress basically the loss of the dollar at that point. They weren't ready for a reset. They've been working towards that for many years, but they weren't ready for it in 81. Excuse me. Then we get to 2008. Basically, a lot of the same things were going on in 2008. Crazy speculation on all kinds of things. Basically, low interest rates and whatever else. And the one thing I'll say about low interest rates, I'm going to cover interest rates more in another video in the future. I think it's very important. But super low interest rates, on the one hand, it gets, like I said earlier, it gets the saver to no longer be a saver because it doesn't pay to save. If you put your money in the bank and you don't get nothing, you put it under, in fact, you don't get any interest or nothing, barely anything at all. But not only are you not getting any interest, you're also losing purchasing power every day. A small percentage of your dollar loses value every day, and especially the more they print, the less it's worth. So, putting it in the bank with no or next to no interest rate doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Putting it under your mattress doesn't make any sense. At least you're not making a banker any money, because that banker, he's taking that money, not giving you anything for interest, loaning it out, speculating on it and everything else, and he's making tons of money and you ain't making shit. Again, that doesn't make sense. But it also doesn't make sense to put it under your mattress, because of the loss of purchasing power. So what is your only other option? Well, your other options are gold and silver. And honestly, gold should be your base. Gold is not volatile. It raises with inflation. Some will say it's an inflation hedge. All right, good point. Sometimes it's a little slow to move to the tune of inflation, but it catches up. Whether, might take a little bit, but it catches up. And a lot of times when it catches up, it surpasses inflation. So it makes up for any losses you had on it. But it's a stable form of wealth. It doesn't lose, it doesn't gain. Now the dollar, and that's where everybody gets confused, and I honestly have been for years, and it's finally coming to me. It's hard to do, though, and I still find myself slipping back sometimes. But the fact that the dollar value or the dollar trade, let's say, I guess is the best way to say it, it takes more dollars today to purchase an ounce of gold than it did in 1933. It only took $20 to purchase an ounce of gold. And today, this very day, it went up above 2,700 again. It's not the value of gold. The value of gold is the same it was back then. It will purchase basically the same amount of goods and or services that it did back then, more or less. It's close. Okay, at times it may be a little more, at times it may be a little less, but overall it's pretty damn close. But it's the dollar that is slipping, It now takes $2,700, and if you think about that for a minute, $2,700 to purchase an ounce of gold or trade for an ounce of gold. Back in 33, it was $20. Talk about the loss of purchasing power. Oh my God, over 100 years. Thereabouts. We're closing in on 100 years. We're roughly 90 years, but whatever, close enough as far as I'm concerned. But that's about what I got for this part. I basically wanted to give everybody a little bit of history lesson. Tell you the truth, I knew some of this I did not know. Maybe I forgot the dates, I forgot the names, whatever. But I honestly, even if I knew it all at one time, I'm sure I did in school. I heard about it all. I'm sure I did, but I'll tell you the truth. I never put two and two together. And you were never taught in school anything about the Federal Reserve. Nothing. Okay. And what they do to our money supply and what they're doing to us. The good news, I think there's a lot of things on the horizon that are extremely positive, and that's some of the things I want to cover in future videos. I'll definitely be expanding on this tomorrow night. In fact, I'm going to start writing another set of notes as we go tonight and tomorrow morning. So I'm going to let you guys go for tonight. Appreciate you stopping by. If you would, like, subscribe, and share. And especially leave a comment. I really appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Good night.